In part 3 of this video, we will examine the emancipation of Black Americans, the formal end to American slavery, and the impact of these events on freed people. As mentioned previously, Frederick Douglass strongly advocated for Black participation in the Union war effort. In fact, Douglass was instrumental in influencing the government's decision to recruit and train Black soldiers. He developed a close working relationship with President Lincoln, and even though the two men disagreed on many issues, he convinced Lincoln that emancipating the slaves in Confederate states would provide the Union with a tactical advantage. And so it happened that on January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which officially released millions of people from slavery across the South. However influenced it may have been by Frederick Douglass, the decision to free so many enslaved people earned Lincoln the historical reputation of the great emancipator and a friend to African Americans. It is worth asking whether this reputation is deserved. We might turn to Lincoln's own comments on the subject. He made it clear that his goal was to save the Union and had nothing to do with compassion for enslaved peoples. He said that if he could win the war and save the Union without freeing any slave, he would have. He said that if he could win the war and save the Union by freeing some and not others, he would also do that. And in fact, that is what the Emancipation Proclamation did. It freed some enslaved people and not others. The fact is, not every slave state had joined the Confederacy. The so-called border states of Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware all had slaves, but had not seceded and were therefore not Lincoln's enemies. Thus, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free enslaved people in these states. This detail proves that Lincoln did not care about ending slavery because it was wrong, but only wanted to weaken the Confederate war effort. He knew that Southern society depended on slavery to grow food and perform other basic tasks, and he hoped that by pulling away the Confederacy's labor force, he would weaken the rest of Southern society and cause it to collapse. Moreover, once the Army began accepting the contributions of Black soldiers, Lincoln saw the opportunity to convert a large percentage of enslaved Black Americans into Union soldiers, thus further turning the tide of war against the Confederacy. The reasons for Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation may then have been less noble than many believe, but there can be no doubt about the tactical advantages. Thanks to the work of emancipated Black Americans, the Union Army eventually overpowered the Confederate Army, which surrendered in April 1865. A few months earlier, and probably seeing that Union victory was inevitable, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which modified the Constitution to ban slavery in every state, including the border states. It is important to note the wording of the amendment, which includes one exception, which is as punishment for a crime. Henceforth, no one would be born into a life of involuntary servitude, but might still be forced to work if convicted of a crime. This clause has had a huge impact on the subsequent history of the United States and is something we must remember. With the 13th Amendment passed and the war ended, enslaved Black people started to celebrate the end of slavery. But word spread slowly in those days, and some continued to toil on plantations until June 19, 1865, when, in Galveston, Texas, the last enslaved people learned that they were free. By then, the war had been over for nearly 10 weeks. June 19th, sometimes called Juneteenth, is celebrated annually by many Black Americans as the real anniversary of the end of slavery. Many have proposed that the date should be a federal holiday, but some Americans have never heard of it. The discrepancy serves to highlight the ongoing need for education and social justice in the United States today. With the war over and slavery ended, Black Americans had cause to rejoice. Many left the plantations to search for lost loved ones, to formally legalize marriages, or simply to test their new freedom. However, America's Black population would soon learn that freedom alone was insufficient to build successful lives in a society steeped in racism. The long struggle for true equality had only just begun.